For Morningstar, I'm Jeremy Glazer. After months of speculation, the European Central Bank finally announced their quantitative easing program. I'm here with Bob Johnson. He's our Director of Economic Analysis for his take on it. Bob, thanks for joining me.
I'm great to be here today.
So let's start with the size of the program, a little bit bigger than some of the leaks from earlier this week. Can you describe what the ECB is going to be doing?
Yep. They'll be buying investment-grade debt from throughout Europe, and they'll buy about 60 billion euros a month, starting in March and going through September of 2016. And even after that, it can be extended more. So it's kind of an open-ended program at a pretty high amount. That 60 billion euros, by the way, translates into roughly 70 billion US dollars worth per month. And to give you some feel, the latest QE program out of the U.S., from the U.S. Fed, was about 85 billion a month. And I don't think that made it quite to a full year of purchases. And then it kind of they started shrinking it again. So it's clearly a large program, as large as almost the U.S. program. So it really, and more than expectations.
Now, how is this program going to be administered? There's some talk about how the national central banks are actually going to be taking on some of the risks here. What does that mean? How is this actually going to work in practice?
You know, they haven't spelled out all the details yet, and those are yet to come, and there's always a little bit of a devil in the details. But it looks like that some of the buying would be pushed down to the national banks, national central banks, and then backstopped by the European Central Bank, but not all of it. So it's not quite as open-ended and as easy as the U.S. program was, but I'm sure part of this is a mechanism so that it doesn't look like the ECB is just blanket buying debt from, say, Greece or whatever, that it has to go through a mechanism of that country buying it and then backstopping it through the central bank.
Now, what's the purpose of this program? Is it really just inflation like they're talking about, or do you think it has that broader role to try to revive the European economy?
Well, the European Central Bank and most of the national banks in Europe are really, their central banks are different than the U.S. Central Bank. Their banks are all charged with one mission, to control inflation. In the U.S., we have the dual mandate of employment and inflation. And so they've always got to be a little careful to couch it, even if their intent is otherwise, that it's all about inflation. And they're saying, you know, it was negative 0.2% in December. And given that it was a deflationary rate, that they had to act because their goal was 2%. And, you know, all they're interested in is inflation. And since it's under 2%, that they needed to act. The reality is that Europe's economy has been dreadfully slow, that union-wide the unemployment rate's like 11.5% versus well under 6% here in the U.S., just to give you some perspective. And so they're still in a world of hurt, and this program also has some hopes of stimulating the economy, but they probably won't publicly say that.
So how successful do you think this program can be? You know, we saw that in the United States, QE seems to have been at least happening at the same time as economic expansion in the UK. There was some success there. Jerry's still out in Japan. You know, will this program actually be able to accomplish those gains?
I am very, very skeptical, but certainly the mechanism will be way different than it is in the U.S., so maybe I'm not grasping all the picture. But, you know, rates there are already very, very low, and they don't have a big housing and a big auto market to stimulate, oh, gee, rates are a little bit lower, boy, we're going to race out and buy that car. And, in fact, even in the U.S., stocks and bonds went up because of the extra liquidity. But even on that front, in Europe, the stocks and bonds aren't as widely held. People have pensions that are funded by the government, less individual stocks and bonds. So they're not going to see the wealth effect that was one of the key parts of the U.S. program. So they'll be missing that. On the other hand, the mechanism where this may work is that European bonds just become so unattractive that all foreign buyers sell everything they've got and then sell their euros and then go invest in another country. And what that does is drive the euro down, and we've already seen it fall from 1.45 to the dollar all the way down to 1.15 earlier this morning. That's a huge move, and that will make Europe more competitive. And that will be the mechanism where this may work. The question is, what products do they have that's going to dramatically help? And that's a little bit more of an open question. Certainly vacation and tourism is on the front end of all of that. But will that be enough to move the needle or create the kind of jobs that they really want to create over there? That's another question. And some of the details in this program are still a little foggy to me, so I'm not convinced that this is a truly open-ended program like the Fed program was.
And given how far the euro has already fallen, in speculation of this program or in anticipation of this program, is there really a lot of room for it to go much lower?
You know what, in almost ever, and especially in the U.S., which I have more familiarity with, than even to a degree Japan and the U.K., the speculation, they have to prepare the market for this type of thing. They can't shock people and ruin all the dealers and instantaneously shock it all and have this big program out of the clear blue. So they kind of warm the market up to it. And in the U.S. case, it was like kind of a 3-month advance thing. Here, we've been talking about this, 3, 4, 5 months. And with all that, everybody kind of builds it in already. And then by the time they actually start doing the buying, interest rates are on the way back up again. And I think that's going to happen again this time.
Finally, what's the impact of this on the United States? Are we going to see any big impacts to the U.S. economy?
Well, there's kind of two schools of thought on that. And one is that obviously with a stronger euro or with a stronger dollar and a weaker euro, that's going to have a pretty negative effect on U.S. exporters. And I think that's probably true. It will have some. But as I've said many times in these videos, that Europe is only about 3% of our GDP, and a lot of that's locked into Boeing airliners and soybeans and stuff that aren't very economic dependent. So I really don't see it being a huge hurt from there. It's certainly going to make overseas more of a headwind than a tailwind that it's been. But I don't think that's probably the biggest effect. I think probably it's a positive effect in keeping commodity prices low because of their slow economy. So that's a big positive for the U.S. But I do think that the strong currency's going to hurt a bit. One of the other things I've heard kicked around, another school of thought, is that boy, the U.S. market's just going to jump because now these European assets are all unattractive because of the low rates and money's ultimate fungible commodity. So they'll borrow from European banks. And where's the best economy in the world right now? Well, the U.S. And so that will be, our stock market will be the beneficiary of that bubble, just in the same way when we did QE, emerging markets were what bubbled up. And this time around, maybe it's the U.S. stock market. I'm not so sure I'm entirely there, but that's one school of thought that's out there.
Bob, thanks for your analysis today.
Thank you.
For Morningstar, I'm Jeremy Glazer. Thanks for watching.